Yeah, it's going down. H-Town, Hiram Clark, B. Scott.
B. Scott from Hiram Clark. B. Scott from Hiram Clark. B. Scott from
All right,
Hiram
welcome to the
Clark.
B Block
B. Scott from
Podcast.
Hiram
I
Clark.
am your host, Brandon Scott. I appreciate you for joining me. We are, as of the time that I'm recording this, on day 3 of NFL free agency. We are at the point where the Texans have done what looks like the bulk of what's going to be significant signings, the significant investments in free agency. And look, I'm gonna get into all of it, some of the themes or some of the main takeaways. That's why we're here. That's what we're here for. But I just want to start with this because I do have the benefit of, hey, I'm recording on a Wednesday, I'm publishing it on a Wednesday, and you're not getting the immediate raw reaction of how I felt watching the Texans go through free agency. Let's say when it opened up at 11 a.m. Monday, 11 a.m. Central Time on Monday, when we were expecting to hear or to get the Ian Rappaport and Adam Schefter updates of the Texans are signing Saquon Barkley and Christian Wilkins, and you just name your favorite free agent that you thought that they were going to go get. Monday was probably the day for a lot of people when you thought you were going to hear about it, where you thought you were going to get it. And that ended up being the case. Now, they did do some things on day one that I did like. Like, I was totally cool with the Nico Autry signing and them acquiring Jeff Okuda. We're going to get into all of that actually in just a little bit. But it was a lot of nervousness I sensed, and it was kind of split. You know, I saw a lot of people that were like, "Hey guys, it's just day one of free agency. Hey guys, it's just free agency. You don't want to make too much of it. It's not like you're going to win the Super Bowl just off of free agency alone anyway. The Texans got a long way to go in terms of building a team, a Super Bowl contender for this year, all of that kind of stuff." I heard a lot of that. And then I also heard a lot of, what are they doing? What are they not doing? Why are things not happening? And then you fast forward to day 2, you fast forward to Tuesday, and it's like, oh, they are making some things happen, and it's not all doom and gloom or whatever it may be. I think it's actually somewhere in between the extreme of where you heard a lot of people saying they don't need to spend a bunch of money, they don't need to throw all this money at free agents, and hey, they need to go do this right now, right away. They need to, they need to pay guys at all costs and all this. Like, I thought they were extremes to the argument, and they actually found themselves somewhere in the middle of being like reasonably aggressive. But the way I felt on the first day was a lot like, and I feel like people can relate to this, even me as an only child, but as someone who has multiple children now, and as someone who did Christmas with cousins. The first day of free agency from a Texan standpoint felt a lot like when it's Christmas and everyone's got gifts under the tree and it's time for everybody to open their gifts. And one of the kids has fewer gifts than the other. Like, for whatever reason, however it's worked out, you look up and either it's you or whatever, one of the kids got fewer gifts than the others. Or maybe one of the kids got better gifts than the other, and it stands out. It's noticeable. And then you start looking around and it's like, man, I don't want to be ungrateful or anything. I don't want to sound like the one that's complaining, but man, it looks like they got better gifts. It looks like they got more gifts. What's up with that? And I've had to be the parent. I didn't really experience this as much as a kid. Maybe because I was an only child. Maybe the siblings, my cousins that I dealt with, maybe they experienced it a little bit more. But I didn't really feel this as much of a child, as much as a child. But I've had to do this with my kids on multiple Christmases where I've had to say, hey, look, your sibling may have gotten one or two more gifts than you. Your sibling might like their gifts a little bit more than you do, or might have gotten the top thing that they wanted, and you didn't get the top thing that you wanted, or whatever it is. But you, at some point, got to focus on yourself and what you got going on and not be worried about what everybody else is doing. Measuring your own success versus somebody else's, or making somebody else's success a measurement of your own. You got to stop doing that. And that is what the first day felt a lot like. It was like, man, the Texans didn't get Saquon Barkley. The Eagles got him. The Texans didn't get Josh Jacobs. The Packers got him. The Texans didn't get DeAndre Swift. The Bears got him. The Texans didn't get Christian Wilkins. The Raiders got him. And there was just like this feeling of, hey man, you're missing out. Your team has all of this cap space, has all of this opportunity, and they're missing out. They're missing out on the opportunity. But and that's what it reminded me of. But I never, and I can say this honestly. I know this is my first time really going on the record about it. I haven't really talked about it on the radio either. But I never really, at any point, based off of the information that was out there, I never really at any point doubted that the Texans were at least competitive and were trying to add better players to this team than what they've been doing over the last few years with free agency. Like, I think the one thing we could acknowledge about this Texans free agency that was different than any other one that we'd seen before with Nick Caserio, and this is the fourth one, right? This is his fourth go round with this, is that it's a better football team with more promise, with a franchise quarterback that actually wants to play for the team, that actually intends to play for the team the next year. And there's more money at your disposal. So there's more money, there's more opportunity, there's more optimism, there's more everything. So that's the difference. Like, I didn't feel like it was fair to try to compare what he had done in previous off seasons and previous free agency cycles with this one, because this one was just so much unlike the other ones. So that's what I thought was going to be really interesting about it. But based off of the information that we had surrounding this one, there was no and really based off of their own history, there really wasn't a reason to think that they weren't going to be willing to spend money. Like, if you do it based off of their own pattern, if you think based off of their own pattern and the things that they actually tell you, the deals that they ended up signing were ones along the lines of what you think they would do. Nick Caserio, from the combine, talked about and told reporters, he didn't want to talk about windows, right? Windows to win, windows to be competitive, because as a general manager, you want to keep that job for as long as you possibly can. You don't want to have a window on you're not a player. If you're successful as a general manager, you could do that job for as long as you want to. So, like, why would he talk about having a window? But later on, he did reiterate something that he'd said before and said in the past. They do look at contracts and team building in 2-year increments. And how does everything fit in line? Okay, you got 2 more years of CJ Stroud before he's eligible for that contract extension, for that max extension, and probably another year after that, I believe, before that money would actually kick in. Maybe the year after that, or maybe even the year after that. But you got at least another couple of years of that, okay? Which means minimum, you have 2 more years of a quarterback on a rookie deal who you believe in. CJ Stroud is somebody who I think everybody believes in. Offensive Rookie of the Year, balled out in the playoffs against the Browns. It's just been excellent. So, like, everybody is down with that. 2-year deals are what they ended up signing, okay? Because that gives you time to adjust for salary cap, for when the cap jumps, and all of that kind of stuff, right? So they want to sign 2-year deals anyway, okay, whether they got the quarterback or not. But now it fits perfectly with the timeline of having the quarterback on the rookie deal. Okay, they're going to have to make some adjustments in a couple of years once the bill comes due on CJ Stroud. So it always made sense to throw big money at the very near future. This was the logic, I think, for a lot of people of why the Texans need to be aggressive, because they have these couple of years to take advantage of CJ Stroud on the rookie deal. Okay, that doesn't mean you just throw money at anybody, but it does mean that you get aggressive. Based off the information that we had out there, and this is, unless you don't believe the information to be true, then that's its own thing. But based off of the information that we had out there, we didn't have any reason to believe that the Texans were going to be tightwads about this, that the Texans were not going to be willing to spend money. Sure, there were questions about who they were going to get, who they were going to be able to keep, right? But we didn't have any reason to believe that the Texans were going to be tightwads about this. They spent a bunch of money last year on the offensive line, extending Laramie Tunsil, extending Titus Howard. They obviously used a high draft pick on a center. They used a high draft pick the year before that on a left guard. They spent money. They traded for and gave an extension to Shaq Mason. So they showed a level of aggression on the offensive line in the previous offseason that I think fits in line with the whole 2-year window sort of idea, right? This was the year where they were going to need to do a similar thing on the defensive line in terms of making a major investment. And I thought the statement that they made and the statement that they have made on the defensive line has been very, very strong. It tells you a lot about what they really think, what they really thought and really think of the defensive line that they put out there in 2023. Now, I thought they were pretty good. I know that they didn't generate a whole lot of sacks, as much pressure as they would have liked to. Like, they weren't as productive as they would have liked to have been in that way, but they were much improved against the run. Very respectable team against the run, I guess, until the very, very end of the season. But improved against the run, and they had two dynamic edge rushers in the defensive rookie of the year and Will Anderson Jr., who they traded uh, their own first-round draft pick of last year, to select number 3 overall. So, like, you needed that to pan out, and sure enough, it did. You see why they did that, because he seems to be that dude. And then on the other side, you had your actual sacks leader in Jonathan Grenard, your actual double-digit sacks guy in Jonathan Grenard, who put up 12 and a half sacks for you. Something that he's shown himself capable of doing when he's healthy, like shown glimpses of being able to do that, just had issues of staying healthy long enough to do so. He did that. And then, of course, you had two solid guys in the middle in Sheldon Rankins and Malik Collins. I thought the defensive line was actually pretty good. That I thought. However, it seems like the Texans didn't necessarily agree with me on that, because very early on in free agency, Jonathan Grenard was out. Like, the deal that he signed with the Minnesota Vikings, I'm going to pull it up real quick, make sure I have it. But the deal that he signed with the Minnesota Vikings, it was announced so quickly, it made me think, hey, I don't even know if the Texans even made an effort to match this. The 4 years, $76 million. I think they said, hey, JG, what you say they giving you, JG? Man, JG, we love you, dog. It's been real. Like, man, like it's been so real, man. We wishing the best for you, but we're not doing that. We're not doing that at all. And they gave him 4 years, $42 million guaranteed. Okay, $76 million is what the contract is worth, but $42 million guaranteed. That's Monday. Tuesday, later in the afternoon, when everybody's trying to get off of work, we find out that they've agreed to a 2-year deal with Danielle Hunter from the Minnesota Vikings. 2-year deal worth up to, I believe, $50 million, but $48 million guaranteed. Danielle Hunter gets more guaranteed money in 2 years than Jonathan Grenard was given over 4 years, which I think is interesting, because it shows you very clearly the Texans were willing to pay top dollar for a top player. They just weren't willing to go 4 years to do it. That's what it tells me. And then also, and look, Jonathan Grenard earned that buck. He did. Like the football people, film nerds love Jonathan Grenard for the most part. Like they love this guy. And so he earned that buck. But he had no business taking a 2-year deal. And I don't think a 2-year deal would have yielded $48 million for him, because the team that gave him a 4-year deal only gave him 42 of a guarantee. Right. So he got less guarantee over 4 years than Danielle Hunter got over 2. I think that's reflective of Danielle Hunter being an all pro, Danielle Hunter being a 3 or 4 time Pro Bowler. I think he's a 4-time Pro Bowler. He's had double digit sacks at least 4 or 5 seasons in his 8-year career. So he's a more proven player and arguably just a flat out better player and deserves that amount of money. You could argue, and I think credibly argue, over Jonathan Grenard. But it just shows you the Texans were willing to spend the money. They just didn't want to make that 4-year commitment. Like, I highly doubt that Danielle Hunter is with the Texans if it's for longer than a 2-year deal, or certainly for longer than a 3-year deal, not a 4-year deal. So that's why that makes sense. Now, before I got on here, I was talking with some people, a couple of my media comrades, and comparing notes and realizing that maybe the public comments that we got about Jonathan Grenard from the Texans weren't necessarily their true feelings. Because that would be consistent with how quickly he was able to sign with another team. But look, I think they really liked him. They really liked him as a player and as a person in the locker room. But it seems like they were looking for a different type of player, from what I could tell. Seems like they were looking for a different type of player. And, on top of this math of 4 years versus 2 years, it seemed like they thought that they could get more bang for the buck at edge rush, which surprised me, because I've been a Jonathan Grenard guy. And look, I just made the case that Danielle Hunter has the more impressive resume and is arguably the better player. But it surprises me because I've been a card-carrying Jonathan Grenard fan since he was drafted. And I think other than the injuries, that's the thing that's held him back, is the injuries. But I think other than that, he has more than lived up to the 3rd-round pick that he was out of Florida. So I've been a big fan of his, but I think that this defensive line is better now. You signed Danielle Hunter to a 2-year deal worth $48 million guaranteed. You bring in Danico Autry, and I was big on this, bringing in one of them former Colts, and I know he most recently played for the Titans, but I wanted to bring in some AFC South badasses from the other teams to come over here. So I was interested in Danico Autry. I was interested in Grover Stewart. I was interested in Kenny Moore, and I know both of those guys ended up going back to the Colts. I was interested in Derrick Henry, who ended up with the Baltimore Ravens. Like, I was interested in all the badasses that I could get from the AFC South. And the ones that they ended up getting were Danico Autry, defensive lineman, most recently with the Titans, but also formerly of the Colts. So we've been watching this dude kick ass for a number of years now. And they also got Azeez Al-Shaair. And I hope I'm saying his name correctly, because everybody butchers it. And so I end up butchering it by extension. But they got Azeez. I know it's Azeez, my man, the linebacker from the Titans last year, but really from the 49ers, from back when DeMeco Ryans was there. If y'all remember, there's that video on Twitter of him at, which game was it that the 49ers played? One of their playoff games, and Azeez Al-Shaair is out there with his teammates, like with his former 49ers teammates, after he's just played a season with the Titans. He's now at that point a free agent, because the Titan season's over with, and he's out there with his former teammates doing whatever it is that they do pregame, like in his regular clothes. Like, he's that big of a fan of the 49ers glory days from when he was there. And obviously, when DeMeco Ryans was there, now he gets to reunite with DeMeco Ryans. And to me, those are really solid moves. Look, my whole thing is, I like Jonathan Grenard. I like Blake Cashman. Those are both guys that I really wanted to see come back. But if you're gonna tell me that the way to replace those guys is to sign Danielle Hunter and Danico Autry, and then to also bring in Azeez Al-Shaair on a 3-year, $34 million contract, which I believe is what his deal was reported, 3 years, $34 million, then look, I can live with that. I can live with that. Now, I want to point this out just to go back to my earlier point here. I know I'm jumping around a little bit. But so before the Danielle Hunter signing, when it was just Danico Autry and Azeez Al-Shaair, okay, man, this is how highly I think of Danico Autry, who had 11.5 sacks last year for the Titans. I was good. I was like, man, look, you take a little bit of a hit because you got an older player. I think Jonathan Grenard's a better player at this point in his career, but I don't think Danico Autry is that far off in quality of player. It's a little bit of a hit, but I can live with this. Danico Autry's deal is what, 2 years, $20 million? I can live with this. Danico Autry replacing Jonathan Grenard, Azeez replacing Blake Cashman. I can ride with this. I can rock with this. Jeff Okudah as the cornerback, potentially replacing Steven Nelson. You're betting on the upside there because that's clearly a talented guy, drafted number 3 overall, at least at some point viewed as a top prospect. I'm pretty sure was an All-American at Ohio State. Like, there are some bones there. There are some bones of potential there where I was like, hey, I don't know if they're better because of this, but it's hard for me to feel like they are much worse. So and that was just after day 1. So based on that, I didn't really have it in me to be like upset about it. I didn't have it in me to be upset about it. I did have some concern when I'm watching Saquon Barkley go off the board. When we had the segment with all of the, there was a segment where we talked about, when was it? Well, it obviously wasn't Friday. Was it late Monday? There was one point where we talked about the all of the running backs that had gone off the board, and it was like, yo, so they really not, once you see Saquon Barkley gone, Josh Jacobs gone, and you see Devin Singletary go and replace Saquon Barkley out there with the Giants, you're like, okay, so is it Derrick Henry? And then it's not Derrick Henry. You're like, and then it's not Aaron Jones. There was some concern there with the running back position. Okay. But I was cool with what they did defensively and what they did on that first day. I was cool with it. I honestly was, because I knew that wasn't going to be all. And I thought what they had done was pretty good. I thought it was pretty good. I did. It was underwhelming, but like not even underwhelming in the like I remember when the Rockets signed Dylan Brooks and Fred VanVleet. I remember saying, man, that is very underwhelming for the amount of money that you have, the amount of money that you're going to pay those guys, and what you're expecting to actually be with them, to be because of them. But with this, I feel like with those guys, you were going to roll out there with a similar quality team with those guys, replacing them. Then you come back the next day and add Danielle Hunter, right? And even before that, with the running back question, even before that, you go out there and you trade for Joe Mixon. What's the solution to striking out in the running back market? Because again, I could not be overly critical of the Texans here, because I did not get the sense that they weren't in the Saquon Barkley sweepstakes. From what I understood, they were one of 2 finalists, possibly, for Saquon Barkley. I knew the Eagles were in the mix. I knew the Texans were in the mix. I didn't really hear way much beyond that, or a whole lot about what his market was beyond that. I can live. They got outbid. And a lot of people didn't want to pay Saquon that. Say, hey, I wouldn't pay that contract. I probably would have, but I understood drawing a line. Even if I want a player, I understand drawing a line and saying, hey, I ain't gonna pay, $13 million, $14 million, $15 million. I'm not gonna give a $38 million. So having a number and drawing a line, or saying, hey, I want a shorter term deal. I don't want Saquon on 3 years, on 4 years, whatever it ends up being. I don't want to do it. I want a 1 year, 2 year guy. And then they end up trading for Joe Mixon, which I thought was a savvy move. Like, and think about it. When Joe Mixon, when we got the news late Monday that Joe Mixon was going to be released, that the Bengals were going to release him, I heard a lot of people talking about, hey, the Texans need to be in on Joe Mixon once he gets released. So that made a lot of sense for them to go ahead and trade for him since it was marginal what they had to give up. They got buku 7th round picks. Marginal what you have to give up to trade for a guy who's going to get cut as a cap casualty. Very marginal. Makes sense to make that trade, to trade whatever that is, to ensure that you get that player and that player doesn't go somewhere else, that somebody else doesn't get said player. And then there's comp picks that I think that are tied to it in free agency as well that make sense in the long term. But in the immediacy, it makes sense to get that player in the building once you've already struck out with previous running backs. Because they were monitoring the Derrick Henry market. If I was Derrick Henry, I probably would prefer Baltimore too. Just if I'm being honest. Like Houston would be on my list, but I'd probably prefer Baltimore too. Struck out with Saquon Barkley. Yeah, man, you got to get you got to get serious. You got to get aggressive a little bit. You see somebody that's gonna be out there in the market, and that's the player that you want, and it ain't gonna take you a whole lot. It's gonna take you an insignificant asset, something that's probably is not gonna contribute to you in the long run to go get that guy. Go get that guy. I mean, honestly, that's what these late round picks are for, to wheel and deal. They're very rarely, not gonna say rarely, but they are only hardly but to just pick a player. They are capital. So I thought that the Joe Mixon trade was acceptable consolation for not being able to land one of those top running backs that were on the free agent market. It was not ideal, and it was not the desired outcome. It wasn't even something that I feel like we talked about either on this podcast or on the radio or anywhere else about, hey, man, what's it going to look like when the Bengals cut Joe Mixon, or when the Texans sweep in and trade for him instead. Like, nobody was even thinking about that until my guy Cody Davis put it out there not too long before it happened. I want to point that out. Cody Davis of SI.com, also the Locked On Texans podcast. Make sure y'all checking my guy out. But he was early on the Texans' interest in Joe Mixon, and then sure enough, they get Joe Mixon at a relatively cheap price for 1 year. I think I mean, you got a guy, a 3-down back, can run inside out, familiar with this exact scheme. And so to me, might have had, well, no, his most productive year was that year that the Bengals went to the Super Bowl. But he was super productive last year, 1,000-yard rushing season. Has been very good for a while now. And I think still has some tread left on the tire. So to me, they did not take a step back just swapping Joe Mixon for Devin Singletary. And I think you could argue credibly that they upgraded there. A lot like Devin Singletary a lot, but they did good there in getting Joe Mixon. And then we'll see what else takes shape with the running back position. But that was the major concern, or a major concern, about how the first day played out. And then then you look up, and on the second day, they traded for Joe Mixon. So they addressed the running game. They addressed the defensive line in a major way, made a major statement about the defensive line, what they thought about it. I talked about the defensive line without even mentioning the news of the day. Malik Collins. They trade Malik Collins to the San Francisco 49ers for a 7th round pick. Very interested to see how that's going to play out, because by the time you even listen to this, they might have re-signed Sheldon Rankins. Maybe the 49ers have released Eric Armstead and they've signed him. But either one of those things sounds good at this point, or both. They might even have room and ability to do both. Substitute. So think about it like this. You could be substituting your entire defensive line, save for Will Anderson. And that's what it looks like it's going to be, right? Unless they bring Sheldon Rankins back, there is potential that they swap out this entire defensive line, save for Will Anderson, the defensive rookie of the year. which again is a strong statement about what they really think about that defensive line from last year. Strong, strong, strong statement. They not only did not bring back the free agent who was the sack leader, didn't bring him back, but they traded away the longest tenured defensive lineman that they had there, and they did so a year after just giving that guy an extension. Not a prohibitive extension that made it like not make sense. I think they ended up saving a little over a couple of $1 million by making the move, but they made the move. They made the move. The longest tenured guy who just a year ago they decided they wanted to re-up. They trade him away. They let go. Well, I guess Grenard would have been the longest tenured guy if he was still on the team, but he wasn't. Right. So they let him go. Sheldon Rankins, we'll see. And then there's Will Anderson, the one man left standing from last year's defensive line. So they do that. They get Joe Mixon in there. I'm good with it. I'm good overall with how this whole thing is played out. I think it shows, we talked a lot about smart aggression on In the Loop with John Lopez and Landry Locker. We talked a lot about smart aggression. I think this is exactly what that is. Aggressively pursuing, the Saquon Barkleys of the world, the Christian Wilkins of the world. Look, man, they took some L's on that first day. Who was I talking? I think I was talking to Ron Hughley on the phone about this just yesterday. Like, man, I can accept an L. I can accept a hard fought L if I just take an L. And I think that's what was happening with the Texans. And so I wasn't like outraged about it because I didn't think that I didn't think it was for lack of effort, for lack of trying, or for even being bad at it. I just think they took L's. They took some L's. Other teams were competitive. There are reasons why Saquon Barkley might want to play for the Eagles over the Texans. I could see the Raiders being in a position where they might overpay or be the ones to desperately pay for Christian Wilkins and the Texans. Say, you know what? I think we can figure this out. I think if we're going to pay this kind of money, I think we can go get maybe a more dynamic player, maybe a more productive sack getter in Danielle Hunter, tomorrow. Something like that. Maybe we like Sheldon Rankins. Maybe we'll bring him back. Maybe we got an idea for how we're going to replace Malik Collins. We don't need to sign Christian Wilkins. Like, if they made that calculation, I'm fine with it. If they got outbid for those cats, I'm fine with it. It's disappointing. Going back to my earlier analogy, it's like, hey, instead of worrying about what everybody else got, worry about what you got. What did you get? And if you watch, man, Danico Autry, been a disruptive player for a long time. I get the age concerns, but if you watched him play last year and have watched him play, I don't know how much you'd be talking about his age, honestly. Particularly going into this year. Now, if something happens this year, give you some feeling to be concerned about that, I'll concede that point. But nothing based off of how Danico Autry has played has really made me that concerned about giving him $20 million over 2 years. Nothing. Aziz Al-Shaair, look, that's a D'Amico Ryans thing right there. You mean D'Amico Ryans went and gave some money to a linebacker that he's coached before to replace a different one that he just got done coaching? I can live with that. Jeff Okudah? Y'all not sure about Jeff Okudah? I'm not either. Y'all not sure if he can live up to the vacancy that Steven Nelson left there? I'm not either. But I don't mind betting on that for the amount of money that they're paying Jeff Okudah. I don't think it's any more than like $4 million. Pull that up too while I'm at it. It'd help if I had these things in front of me when I started talking about them. But it was such negligible money, I didn't even bother to commit it to memory. Like I got Danielle Hunter's deal off the top of my head. But this 1 year deal worth just under $5 million total and only $2.5 million guaranteed to Jeff Okudah to possibly be your number 2 corner. drafted in the same slot just the year before as the guy who is your number one corner, I can roll with that. Dude had an injury problem, underperformed in Detroit, was actually okay in Atlanta last year. Look, I'm not out on the idea of him being the number 2 corner and being able to roll with that. Signed Mike Ford of Cleveland Browns fame. He should be able to provide some depth for you in some form or fashion. Got Lonnie Johnson back. I'm gonna be honest. I'm rooting for Lonnie Johnson because he's from Gary, Indiana, just like my father is from Gary, Indiana. So I root for Gary, Indiana products. I totally root for him. But once Lonnie Johnson left Houston, and y'all remember there was the whole cornerback safety thing when he was here the first time. Once he left Houston, I did not follow whether he played cornerback or safety. So, I mean, I could look it up, but I'm just trying to be real and authentic with you guys right now. I don't know what position he plays. I know he's a defensive back. I know that he has played corner and has played safety. I don't know what position he plays or what position he will play for these Texans. I could see him on special teams because he's a big old athletic dude. So I could see him on special teams, causing some problems on special teams, and I hope he does that. But I don't know what position he plays. That'll be something to watch for, to look after. Maybe by the time we get to training camp, I will have done the research that I should and will know what position he plays. But as we sit here now and I talk to you, I don't know. But I didn't mind it. I didn't mind it. You know, I didn't mind any of it. It was not. I'll say this, and this is something that I would think I would only say on the podcast. Maybe not something that I would say on the radio. But these last few days definitely have informed, for me, have informed the editorial strategy for next year. Because I found it hilarious. Okay, that by the end of Monday, the biggest deal that had taken place for the Texans, the biggest deals were the deals that weren't. It was Jonathan Grenard leaving for a 4-year, $76 million deal worth $42 million guaranteed with the Vikings. Him leaving, Blake Cashman leaving for the Minnesota Vikings. It was Danico Autry, who I just told y'all I like that signing, but that was their biggest move. And we spent weeks talking free agency to death, anticipating free agency. Free agency is coming. The Texans are going to have all of this money. They got all of this cap space. They got this team. They're going to be this free agent destination. What's more attractive for free agents? What are they going to weigh more? DeMeco Ryans or CJ Stroud? Shit, money. Money talks, man. Like, it informed the editorial strategy. I don't know exactly how I'm going to play free agency next year. It's been a long time since the Texans were in a position like this. Maybe this may have been the first time and only time they were in a position like this since I've been covering them. Probably is. So this definitely informed how, I'm not going to speak for the station, but specifically how I will view and talk about free agency. Because now I know, and I mentioned this earlier, we didn't really have a template for how Nick Caserio was going to exactly play this part of free agency, this side of free agency, of actually having an opportunity to do some things. But now I know he prefers the 2-year deals for sure. But I also know he's willing to spend the money. And if I had done maybe a better job of piecing together the context clues based off of what he said and done in the past, I probably would have figured that. Because they have spent money before, as I mentioned before, with the offensive line. You can't look at how this offensive line is paid and has been invested in and call these guys cheapskates. You might even accuse them of spending too much money. You might. I don't think I would. I'm good with it. But you might question it. And then the shorter deals, that's what they've been doing, just with a lower quality of player. Now they've upped the quality of player that they're going with. Because they have a better team. Because they have a quarterback, a Pro Bowl quarterback on a rookie deal. Just in the second year of the rookie deal at that. So I think this was a good week. You know, it was somewhat anticlimactic until the Danielle Hunter signing. And if you had come away from this and said, "Hey, what if Danielle Hunter is the biggest star that you signed?" Katie native, by the way. So shout out to Katie. Born in Jamaica, but grew up in Katy. Went to Morton Ranch. So shout out to Katie and Morton Ranch. But if you had come away and said, like on Monday, let's say at 10:30, half an hour before free agency, legal tampering, as they call it, officially begins, and you say, "Hey, the biggest star by midweek is going to be Danielle Hunter, and you're going to have to live with that." How do you feel? You probably would have been like, "All right, all right, all right. Tell me about the deal. Give me the contract details. I give you the contract details." You're like, all right, cool, cool. I'm cool with that. But that's it. That's the biggest deal. Oh well, you signed Danico Autry, and Jeff Okudah is going to be your corner, your number 2 corner now, and you also made an inconsequential trade for a consequential player in getting Joe Mixon. Those things happen too. Yeah, I mean, how do you feel about those things? I don't know how much that would have tickled your fancy at the time, is what I'm saying. But for me, after watching it play out, I'm good with it. I'm good with it. I think the defensive line is stronger and it is probably getting stronger as we speak. By the time I finish this thing, let me see, man. I got Adam Schefter's Twitter pulled up. I could just check. Have they signed? Let's see, as I'm saying, I'm reading for real. Like, let me see. Okay. I was gonna say, if they signed Nick Bosa, not Nick Bosa, but whichever Bosa is not the one with the 49ers, Joey. Y'all know I'm terrible about that, right? That's my thing. If I know who your brother is, I'm gonna call you by his name. So Nick Bosa will always be Joey, and Joey will always be Nick, even though they are clearly two different people. It's a thing that I do. It's a thing that I do. But no, they're not gonna probably get one of them Bosas or Khalil Mack, Joey Bosa or Khalil Mack. That was another cap casualty idea to look after and didn't end up happening. Okay. But I'm looking here just to see, because the Chargers were an interesting one, because it's like they got Khalil Mack, they got Joey Bosa, they got Keenan Allen, and okay, so let's see. They did release Mike Williams. That was the one piece of news that I hadn't checked out or seen. Okay, all right. So live reading on the podcast, not the greatest thing, but I wanted to check that since I was going to wrap this thing up, which that did remind me, by the way, and I should pull this up. It did remind me. The Texans draft, I think, has some juice. I think it has some juice because if there is a disappointing thing that came out of these last few days, it's that the most significant moves that you made on offense were bringing back Dalton Schultz and trading for Joe Mixon, which, look, I think both of those things are good ideas. I think that those are both good moves. But when I wrote for Cron.com after the Texans lost to the Ravens in the divisional round, I wrote that the one thing that was clear from watching this team is that they need more weapons. And it's not a knock on the weapons that they got or on the weapons that they got on the top end. Nico Collins, Tank Dell, okay, like those guys a lot. John Mechie and Xavier Hutchinson being on the team is just fine. You see what you got in them in training camp, and then you make your decisions from there. But that to me meant 2 more spots needed to be up for grabs, and that was whether to decide that Robert Woods is going to be a cap casualty, which I think is something to probably still look out for, and replacing Noah Brown, which I assume they were going to do. They did not do that. They gave Noah Brown $5 million, which I'm also cool with. I'm cool with having Noah Brown around, but that to me means that something's got to give. It can't be we're bringing back Noah Brown and the other three guys, Robert Woods, John Mechie, and Xavier Hutchinson. Like, you just, between those four guys, you needed to get better. So one of those guys needed to be replaced. The most logical one, it seemed to be, was Noah Brown, because he had a decent season and was going to be a free agent. They brought him back. Okay, cool. But that means now I'm looking at this wide receiving core, and we made this mistake last year of underrating the wide receiving core, maybe overstating how bad it was going to be, because they actually ended up being pretty good. But to me, you need a little bit more than that. I wanted cats like Darnell Mooney. I'd thrown out there Gabe Davis. I thought would cost too much, but I'd be interested. Calvin Ridley's still out there at the time of this recording, I believe. But the draft now, I found it hard to have a lot of really strong draft opinions before these first few days of free agency played out. But now I feel pretty confident about wide receiver at number 23, or trading back and still getting one. Like, I feel comfortable that in some capacity, some form of fashion, the Texans are going to come away with a wide receiver in that draft. Like, I find it hard to believe that it's going to be defensive line, which I thought was a possibility before free agency. I find it hard to believe that it'll be cornerback. I find it a little bit more believable, but I don't think it's going to be cornerback. I think it's got to be wide receiver at that spot. You're going to have a lot of wide receivers available to you, but the very best of them are going to be gone by then. So to me, that's the perfect spot to either trade back a little bit or just to pick right there at 23 on the best wide receiver that's there. That's what I would do. Now, I think they're in a position where, and most teams should approach it this way, they'll just draft the best player available. The best player that's available to them, absent of being a quarterback, which it won't be, they'll draft that guy. And I think that's going to be a wide receiver. So now suddenly, because of what they did in free agency, or have done so far in free agency, and what they haven't done in terms of upgrading that wide receiver room, running it back with Noah Brown, running it back with Dalton Schultz, that makes me very, very intrigued for that 23rd overall pick, or for what they do with it, whether they trade it and what they ended up drafting, or whether they just straight up draft there. I feel like the Texans draft has some juice. Now I can start really thinking and visualizing what they might do in the draft. So that's a good place to be in as well. All right, guys. I'm going to be on the radio for the rest of the week. I feel like I should mention that whenever it's a thing, and I know it. Coming to you right now on a Wednesday afternoon. By Wednesday night, I'll be on the radio with Sean Bajani, who is across the hall from me right now with Clint Sterner, actually pulling double duty. He's doing the show. He's in for Ron right now, and then he's going to do 3 hours with me tonight on Area 45 on Sports Radio 610. By the time you guys hear this, that might already be happening or have happened already. But you should have heard this by Thursday, certainly, and Friday for sure, when I'll be back on Area 45 again, but that time with Patrick Creighton. Patrick and I have never done radio together. So that should be an interesting sort of introduction. We know each other. We talk to each other offline for sure, him being in the building and everything. And I'd met Patrick a little bit before that, before he joined or rejoined the station anyway. But that should be interesting. It'll be, if you're familiar with Patrick Creighton and obviously familiar with me, this will be the first time you hear us on the microphone together. So I'm going to plug that. I'm going to tell you all about that, man. 7 to 10 Central Time, Area 45, Sports Radio 610. Catch that on the Odyssey app. You can watch it on YouTube and Twitch and all of that. So make sure y'all are checking that out, man. That should be a lot of fun. I'm going to get out of here, man, because I'm actually about to jump on the radio right now as we speak. Did this right before I did that. So make sure that y'all are subscribing to the B Block Podcast, man. Wherever you get your podcast, be sure to like it, rate it, review it, tell a friend about it. And until next time, y'all be good.